All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the GameDev.tv community podcast. This is episode number 17. Let's see. My name is KB. I'm here with Ricardo. Oh, no. Damn, I got to restart this crap. I wrote some. All right. My bad. I'm always starting with Ricardo. He's not even here. All right. Let's do this again. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the GameDev.tv community podcast. My name is KB. I'm here with Brian and Mason. We're going to be discussing clean code. Without further ado, here's episode number 17. All right, so I got a little section from this book. It says, God is in the details, said the architect Ludwig. This quote recalls contemporary arguments about the role of architecture in software development, and particularly in agile world. Bob and I occasionally find ourselves passionately engaged in this dialogue. And yes, Rowe was attentive to utility and to the timeless forms of building that underlie great architecture. On the other hand, he has also personally selected every doorknob for every house he designed. Why? Because the small things matter. Right, Bryant?
The small things.
Absolutely. All the small devil's in the details, right?
Exactly. Can't have something that's like, too messy, too unorganized, not, named right. Otherwise, we get lost in the details. We just can't have that.
No, of course not. You gotta have code that's easy to read and easy to manage.
So Mason, in your job, is it like mandatory to keep certain things in like a correct syntax or something like that?
At my job, I'm the only programmer. Well,
Oh, really?
I'm the only computer science guy. I wouldn't say that I'm the only programmer. All the electrical engineers, they all know how to code for the most part. But there's no standard. It's all just you know how to code, you know how to code, and then you got to make sure the people down the line, the next generation that are using your software, like that, they got to know what you're doing too. So, clean code is definitely important.
Oh yeah, definitely. So there's like so basically only really you're like programming everything and everybody else just kind of just like following what you made.
I mean, depends. So we all get different projects. I actually just got a project today. I'm building like a UI for this automated barcode conveyor belt type deal.
Hmm.
So it's going to go through and scan a bunch of things, and he wants a certain process flow and for them to be able to click certain buttons. So I'm on it with one other guy, and I'm just going to
Yeah.
be writing the code. So nobody reviews it. We don't really have like a code review process, which, I mean, I think that's better if you're, writing software to have somebody look at your code afterwards. At my job, it's like if it works, like nobody's
If it
complaining.
works, nobody's
Yeah,
gonna. Yeah.
exactly. So
Okay.
I mean,
Interesting.
we've had some bad programmers in the past, and we've had to go and basically clean up their code. So clean code is something that has to happen, whether it happens when you write it or when somebody else writes it.
That brings up a great point that like you may not be writing something for anyone now, but later on somebody's gonna need to use that code, and if they don't know how to read it or use it, it's just pointless. They're gonna have to waste time fixing it up.
Right. Yeah, code doesn't last forever. I mean, well, it does, but somebody's always going to change it.
Hmm.
Yeah. It has to be maintained by
Exactly.
you or somebody else in the future.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're the only one coding it, you must follow your own standards at least then to be
Yeah.
able to go back and edit your own code.
Basically. Yeah. I mean, we all have our own little, what would you say, design. We have our own way of doing things when we're
Sure.
writing clean code. I mean, there are some fundamentals though, definitely.
Nice.
Yeah.
Brian, how do you keep things organized when you're writing programming?
Well, I mean, there's a variety of things. I mean, when you kind of take down that whole clean code, and if you go back to the book, you can really start with the very basics, right? Meaningful names. Don't do abstracts on variables. It's like you don't need to abbreviate. You can make it as long as you want, basically. Um, More classes than less classes, and functions, keep them small. Keep them limited to one thing or a couple things, but essentially one function. Well, yeah, I guess one purpose per function. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
One task, however you want to define that. You know, the functions do one thing instead of trying. I mean, you read some other people's codes, and especially new people, and their functions are massively long. It's like, man, you need to refactor some of this stuff out into little bite-sized chunks so that we can then further help you figure out what you did.
Yeah, that's actually one thing I see a lot of issues with. Is I'm reading functions that are doing 10 different things, but the function name is, change color to red. So,
Right, exactly, right?
how are you really supposed to know what's going on?
Yeah.
You're like, what's happening?
Why is there business logic and change color to red?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I mean those are some of the bigger ones, and then refactoring plays an important role into that. Take your functions, make them smaller and smaller and smaller.
Definitely.
What was Ben's thing about refactoring? Always refactor, like when you feel like you can't understand what you wrote, like a couple of days ago or something.
Oh, I don't remember him mentioning that, to be honest. But I mean, essentially, right? If it becomes so convoluted that you don't understand it, then it's probably time to refactor. If you
I
find
think that's
yourself,
exactly what he said, to be honest.
yeah, or if you find yourself repeating yourself in code, it's time to refactor. Get those functions that are being redone more than once out into their own functions.
It's dry. Don't repeat yourself. Remember that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
There we go.
That kind of stuff. That it all makes sense.
Do you guys think that you should do like a second run through of your code and then clean it up, or you should clean it up as you're writing it? So just learn to like write, perfectly clean code, so you don't have to do that second little read through.
I think I'm more in favor of a second read through, because I think sometimes just getting the functionality to exist is important, and then you can kind of go back and you can read through it, and you can maybe even optimize it a little bit when you do that process.
Yeah, actually 100%
it depends. If it's something small, maybe you don't really have much of a read through, but if it's a longer process, then
yeah, I think it has to do with kind of how far along you are. If you're just starting out some random program or idea or functionality, it's a little different than if you've already, the program's made and you're adding little bits. Then that's the part that needs to be clean. There's no need to go back over that kind of stuff.
Right, exactly. And if you're reviewing and changing someone else's code, obviously you're gonna read through it multiple times and know what your impact changes and how it's going to really be felt by the software.
Right. Yeah, the bigger it gets, the more important clean code is, for sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. What are good ways of cleaning up like the code? Using, let's see, for some right here it says like choose descriptive names, make meaningful distinctions, use searchable names. Just like, I guess for instance, just make it readable for yourself, and then maybe get someone to read it over it to make sure that what you're writing also makes sense. Because you sometimes when you're doing something, you're like, oh, it makes sense to me, but like
you can do code reviews, absolutely. But I think it does fall back a little bit to that, right? So that pseudo self-documenting code doesn't necessarily mean that your code has to have a bunch of comments in it, but it means that you can almost read the code story. It makes sense. The function names make sense. The variable names all make sense. They're not, just some weird cryptic message that you're going to have to kind of decipher the functions. Like you can just read it like a book and follow it step by step. Look at it like it's a procedural language, what's it doing next? What's it doing next? And you can read it. That's a big part of clean code to me, is making it legible.
Right. I mean, code's difficult enough to understand, right? Why make it more difficult with some weird variable names and different functionality with functions and all that good stuff?
Yep. And the same thing, it does go back to that, doing more than one thing in a function. That's a big one, right? If you have a function that sets a setting, don't have it set 17 other settings at the same time.
Right.
Have
and
17
if you do,
functions.
change the function name. Simple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Make it fit.
Definitely. Clean code, I feel like it's got a lot to do with, well, not a lot to do, but it definitely plays factor into efficiency as well. Like you could really write some pretty nasty code that works, but it doesn't. It's not the most efficient way you could go about solving the problem. So I think writing clean code can kind of speed up your code as well.
That's another good
Yeah.
thing about like refactoring is like you can write something that's disgusting, messy, but it works. So then you can take that and then slowly start making it more efficient, more clean.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
basically are improving your coding skills by your own code. As long as you make it better and it works and people understand it.
Self-taught.
Yeah. That's also another thing that's important. It's like discipline. You have to have the discipline to make your code clean. Because
Yeah,
you're always like, ah, man, I get it, and nobody's ever gonna read it. But it's like that's not the point. The point is you want to, especially if you're like learning right now, taking all these courses, you want to make sure you continually write stuff in clean code. So one day when you're on your own and you're in a like let's say Naughty Dog and you're building The Last of Us 3, you need to make sure that everyone in that company can understand your code so that this game can come out on time and not be delayed and not have like overtime for everybody working like crunch hours. All because you didn't want to write your code clean.
absolutely.
Yes. And especially if you're learning, realize that you're going to go back and read your own code eventually because you're not going to remember what you did somewhere and how you did it. And then throw on horrible code. You're not even going to be able to read your own code and figure out what you did. I have some old code that I can't read and understand what I did. I'm sure we all do.
No doubt. And I can't tell you how long it actually does take to try to re-understand code that you didn't write or that you wrote so long ago.
Right.
And I'm at work, and I worked on this recent project with RFID tags, and the code was written 2 years ago, and just me getting involved with it was, I don't know, it took maybe 2-3 days to even understand like the architecture, the design, where things were happening, to trace everything through. Like the code, there's no comments. The functions were kind of doing crazy stuff. Like if you wrote a clean code, I could be in and out in a day. So you're just kind of
Yeah.
wasting time at that point.
Yeah, depending on the length of the program, sometimes it might be easier just to rewrite it from the top down and just be like, whatever.
Honestly,
I have a phone app at work that's kind of that way. I didn't really write it very clean, and it does what it needs to do. But at the end of the day, it's like, I need to rebuild it. I'm just going to rebuild
screw
it
it.
from scratch.
Wow. Can you imagine it? Someone spent like maybe months building something and you're like, yeah, I'll just, what? Make it my own.
Copy
It
paste.
depends. I mean, this one took me days to build. So it's not like it would take me that long
Wait,
to
but
rebuild
what
it.
if they're not as good? And then take like way longer.
Well, I mean, yeah. Well, again, I mean, it still falls back to the same thing. If they're not as good and you have really horrible code, then they're never going to follow along with it, probably, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's just not good enough. What do you think is the number one enemy for clean code?
Enemy.
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 For lack of
Indentation.
indentation, I would say time is probably the number one enemy. I think that sometimes you're in a hurry to get something out, and you just write unclean code, it just to finish the task, basically.
Yeah, I think actually I changed my answer.
What was your answer originally?
Instantly. Mine was more of a joke. I mean, indentation is like, it's just gross to look at, but you can still read it.
No, I mean that's a good one. I don't know if it's the number one enemy, but it's an enemy. No, because like when we do
With indentation is you can go overboard, but I think part of it is that there has to be a certain level of consistency to it too.
Yeah.
People can over indent, and like I'm not a big fan when the code starts running off the screen and you have to like start scrolling the editor over to see
that's the worst. No, I hate
all of
writing
the
like that.
line, and it's just like, come on, break it up. You can put it on multiple lines,
Right.
Well,
or
in a
maybe that
team,
line's too long.
in a team, you should just come up with like the standard of what you guys are gonna write and how it's gonna be written before going on, like how it's gonna be indented. Because that's the number one thing. You could do it so many different ways. It's like, how are we gonna do it? Because then you might make yours this way, and you're like, oh, let's just like trade, gits, and let me download it. Oh, and why did you indent it this way? Now you get confused because you're thinking things are. I sometimes I'll look at it like, why is this? Oh, it's a curly brackets, and it's just in the same line. My bad.
Yeah.
My bad.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, and everyone has their style.
speaking of indentation, you guys use obviously Visual Studio, right? When you're writing
Yeah.
code for
Yep.
projects.
2019.
Do you ever download this little plugin called CodeMade?
No, what's that?
It's kind of for the listeners. I know you're trying to. These people are doing courses, so maybe they shouldn't be shouldn't be jumping straight to this. But it's a little plugin that basically it ends up being in like your right click. So when you right click on the code, you can do like there's a bunch of different options. One of them is clean up active document, and it'll go through and it'll indent and space out everything really nice and evenly. So if you ever kind of mess it up, you know how when you're coding and sometimes the editor gets all weird and you just don't want to fix it all and whatever, you just right click, clean up, and it like makes it all look pretty again. It doesn't change variable names or anything like that, but it's just kind of handy.
Huh, that's interesting. I'll have to take a look at that one.
That's really cool. Now we have a variety of what I'll call it, skill types here. We got beginner, intermediate, advanced. But even I feel like beginners can use that after a while. They'll be like, yeah, let's just let me see what clean code looks like all the time.
Well, and that's just organized
I wouldn't call it
code,
clean.
right?
Yeah, it's
Not
organized.
clean code, it's just organized. It's
Oh, yeah.
following a defined style sheet, whether you subscribe to that style sheet or not, essentially,
Okay.
right?
Heard that.
For lack of a better way. Kind of like whether you put the curly brace on the same line as the function name or put it on the line below it kind of thing, and that
Always
kind of
below.
stuff.
Always below.
See, I go back and forth. It's like sometimes I find it looks cleaner when it's on the same line as the function name.
That's true. I have been caught doing the same line as well.
You know, it's like it
It's
looks.
like how you feel about it.
And then other times, it like I don't know, it looks cleaner below it too. I don't know. It's just weird.
That's how you're feeling that day. What'd you have to break?
Basically.
Yeah.
How do you guys use comments?
Oh, I just don't comment anything. It's just easier if you just leave them out. Not just kidding.
That's pretty much what I got from reading this book.
Don't use comments?
It's pretty much just like, don't use comments for this, and then use comment if you really need to like explain something that isn't explained already with your good naming. So it's basically saying you should write things, you should name things in a way where you don't name it. Yeah, you need to comment anything. And then obviously like they'll have like comments like to do, which is I guess is helpful, especially if you're learning. Like, oh, to do, we're gonna do this later. But other than that, it's like
to-dos have advantages too. Like I'm pretty sure Studio picks them up, but I know like within Java and stuff, you can comment things with to-dos, and then Java Doc picks it up and creates a to-do list for you. And I'm almost positive Visual Studio does the same thing. If you flag something as a to-do, it'll somewhere in the editor you can pull up your to-do window and go back and find all your to-dos.
yeah, I remember Ben showing something like that.
Yeah.
I remember back when it first started, it's always just like I want to like comment. This is exactly what it was, like it said. I'm like, I like putting that comment. It makes it, I don't know, to me feel good.
You know, if you're
good.
a beginner and you're just learning to code, you probably can't over comment because you're also kind of self-documenting it for yourself. So you know what you're doing, why you're doing it. If you're getting later and you're more seasoned, then yeah, you'll probably find yourself putting in a lot less comments because it's kind of self-explanatory. If I have a fire projectile function, then I'm pretty much hoping that fires a projectile. If it doesn't, then you better put a comment in there why it's called that. You know?
It does something else, like jump.
Exactly, right?
I mean, that's not.
So it does kind of fall back down. If you find yourself over commenting, then maybe you don't have very clean code.
Or you don't understand how or what you're doing.
Right.
Or I wouldn't say you wouldn't understand, more of you're trying to, like you said, document so later at least somebody understands what's going on.
Right. Or justify it, maybe. Justify it to yourself why you're doing it this way.
Yeah,
like,
I've done that a lot. That's really like I'm handling some complicated logic or something that's like it's just not, inherently easy for me to understand as I'm writing it.
right.
You write a line, put a comment, write a line, put a comment, just so you kind of like can walk through it. I don't know. It depends. Maybe you didn't have enough coffee, maybe whatever it
Well, and
is.
I think sometimes you'll find yourself doing that, like you're saying, like as you're coding it, to kind of
Yeah.
keep track and look at an outline as you're doing it.
Yeah. I
Then
would
you
never
might
go.
kind of strip out those comments when you're done. It's like, okay, now I know what I'm doing.
Hmm.
I could see that,
Right.
if you're actively working on a function. But if it's just like the header at the beginning of a function explaining what a function does, hopefully the function's clean enough to tell you that.
It's funny that you brought that up because the second KB brought up comments, I was like, oh, well, the only time I would ever use comments is, to explain what a function does. But then thinking about it now, like as you guys were talking,
Right.
I never read them. Like I'm either jumping into the code by, going to the reference of something, or I just read the name of the function and I should know what's going on. So
Right.
reading the comments is like last resort if I have absolutely no clue what the hell's happening.
Exactly. And then you kind of think to yourself, why don't you know what it does, right? I mean, if you have a function called square root, I'm pretty sure it's going to calculate square root, but
I don't
hopefully
know.
it
I've seen
does.
some bad code lately.
Well,
I
that's
just have to
exactly
be
what it comes down
confused.
to, right? That
Right.
becomes the problem. Is like you can find bad examples where they should have done something different, but it's like if it was done right, then it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah. And that comes back to the clean code part. You do it right the first time and you save everybody a headache.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree. No, there's something interesting here. It's like whatever else a to do might be, it is not an excuse to just leave that code there. Which is
Well, that's
interesting because you'll think it's
true.
like, oh yeah, to do, fix it up, and it's like, no, no, like it still needs to be clean.
I
So
don't
that
think there's
way,
ever an excuse. You
yeah,
can you can
no
try to defend
excuse.
yourself, but there's no
See,
excuse to have nasty code.
no, and I think that's where you kind of fall back down to that time constraint sometimes too. If you're under pressure to get something done, you might have a couple to dos in there. Fix this later. I don't have
Mhm.
time now to fix it, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna
No,
put a
and
to
that's
do here.
completely that's the whole refactoring. You're going to come back through anyway.
Exactly.
If you don't look back at your code afterwards, I don't know. I guess I always do. I'm not sure if everybody does, but
No, if it works, you just move on.
close the program,
That's right. You're
push
done.
it.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Done for the
there's
day.
a little bit of truth. Some people won't, right? If it gives them the end result, they're not going to look at their code again. And depending on what you're doing, that may be okay.
Yeah.
If it's not an overly complex or big program,
Yeah, it depends on the scale for sure.
you know.
What about like frameworks like MVM, MVVM? You guys familiar with like how to
No.
organize? I'm not sure how it is with game development versus application building, but
I mean, nothing I've really delved into, but certainly, yeah, you could leverage those. I mean, I know I have seen stuff on kind of the MVM, you
mhm.
know,
To be
MVM
honest, they kind of
framework.
confuse me. The whole trying to organize it that way because I feel like trying to keep that structure, at least with MVVM, like they basically have the model that's doing its all the database calls, whatever the big processing is,
Mhm.
and then you have a view model that communicates with all the like the
Right.
interface, right? But you have to have a view model for each individual interface you have according to the framework, and I feel like that to me is just way more complicated than having it all in just one place where I know this is the data center, this is what's happening, and this is the GUI. So I
I
don't know.
think
It's
it's
just preference,
I,
I guess.
I think in some aspects of it, I would say that it might depend on the nature of the program too. So, like in the day job, we do line of business applications, and some of them are very much just kind of tied to the code. Other ones, that I've seen or used in the past, the interface is very much kind of a separate program from the database and that middle tier business logic. It just communicates with the business logic tier, which then communicates to the database tier to, handle data access. And it allows each of those components to be changed as long as they don't change their interfaces. Then everything still seamlessly works. So you can enhance your database processes, but as long as they make the same call, they don't have any knowledge that anything changed.
Right. Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I wonder when you should decide to use a framework, if any. Is it should be something you make prior, while you're designing the project, thinking about it, or would you say you should, start building the application, see how it's going, and then implement an architecture after that?
That's a good question. I would say in the beginning, to be honest.
If you're going to do
just
one,
because I have to imagine refactoring to that would suck. Without lack of a better way of phrasing it. I mean,
well, if you don't
didn't build it,
if it's not right away, you better do it, in the first day.
Right. I mean,
if you're lost.
Yeah,
that's exactly it, right?
Time.
Yeah, but if you relate it to game design, I mean, I know I've seen courses and papers on kind of the same model view controller design for Unity or Unreal, and it makes a lot of sense, and there are aspects of game development which I'm sure heavily use it, especially when you get more data-driven games. You're almost going to have to, because you can't necessarily put everything into a game object.
Agreed. Yeah, definitely it comes into play when you need some organization on like the bigger scale.
Yeah.
I noticed from doing the RPG course that like it's very important. Make sure that everything is very well organized so that way you can create a system that, like, for instance, inventory, right? Instead of creating a totally different scripts for each entire like inventory type, like fire or ice and stuff, you create one script that does it all, and then it can branch to it, but it's not dependent on it, so that the code doesn't completely crash the whole game. Because that happens to me sometimes. I'll be like, why is this game just not loading or working? And it's because I depended so many things on one, like a bunch of scripts, that like it just exploded. Yeah.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. We can't have that.
No.
That makes it hard to like learn, because I'm just like spending all my time trying to like debug, and then I mean I'm learning how to debug and like refactor, but I'm not learning the stuff that I'm trying to take this course for. So stuff like that is just headaches. It gives me headaches.
You give me headaches.
Maybe you're not testing enough through it too.
Yeah.
Breaking too many things at one time.
Mm-hmm. More testing. We need fall testing rules.
I actually read something today. Is like, untested code is broken code. So
get that.
You haven't tested it, you haven't ran it, and you don't know it. Treat it like it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, right? I mean, pretty much is.
Yeah.
Probably not necessarily, but
Yeah, if you know what you're doing, you can have a good idea, but until it runs past that break point.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Should test if it's readable, test if it won't break, test if it's independent.
Just keep testing. Oh no, I lost you guys.
Are we back?
Are we good?
Cool.
And what happened?
I don't know.
Technical issue. It happens. But yeah. Test.
Yeah. Testing. I mean, there's a lot to clean. I mean, if you want to go back to clean code, just in general, even just the book. I mean, error handling is a big part of it too.
Huge. Yeah.
Make sure you're doing the try catch blocks and or whatever method you use to do your error handling. That's a big part of it. And you if I fall back down to a learning trick that especially with the game dev community, especially when I go through like I want to call them their when they post questions, so many people don't put any debug logs, so you can't follow anything on what they're doing because they don't output anything along the way. So you have to we'll go back in and add debug logs so that we can then see where things don't work. So some of that just kind of tedious, non-user facing stuff is still important to include in your code so that you can track down your errors better. But then, the try catches and, the error handling will help you isolate your own problems better too.
Yeah, I think try catches are a lot more underrated than a lot of pieces of code. Just because if you don't want your program to crash, put it in a try catch. At least something will notify you that something went wrong instead of it just dying on you.
Mm-hmm.
So
right, yeah, gracefully handle the error.
You
And
guys do that
alert.
really well in Unreal. Just toggle breakpoint, and when it breaks, it tells you exactly where.
that's nice.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
in Visual Studio, it'll jump to where, like the last bit or the null
Right.
point exception or whatever. But rather than having that, it'd be nice to just spit up a message box and then keep running your program instead of rebooting it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and sometimes the error isn't where you think it is. Like 9 times out of 10, I see a lot of posts. It's, if it's in Unity, it's for null pointer references because they haven't initialized something in some other part of their scripts on some other object, and they're not even touching that object right now, so they don't think that's where the error is. So that's where the try catches kind of come in, because if they would have done that, it would have at least thrown an exception that they could reference something on instead of just letting it crash at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I got this really great quote. It says, "You should name a variable using the same care with which you name a firstborn child." I think that's for everything too. You should take care of everything you do. Name everything
with the same care.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
Nobody cares about the second or third, but the firstborn, that's all that matters.
First is the most important.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
was gonna say I'm pretty guilty of like using some pretty bad variable names, at least initially. So like we were saying about, getting some functionality, if I'm just, I'll throw a couple X, Y, Z, whatever it is until it works. And then I'll go back through and change the names. This is what this really is. This is what this really is.
I guess if you're
At least you
disciplined enough to go
refactor
back, yeah.
at least you refactor to a cleaner name. It's when you leave that in there that becomes a problem, and you're just seeing a bunch of X, Y's, and Z's.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it really hard. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, obviously, a nice not long is not the right word, but a nice appropriate variable name goes a long way.
Definitely.
Okay. Clean code is not written by following a set of rules. You don't become a software craftsman by learning a list of heuristics. Professionalism and craftsmanship come from values that drive disciplines. Make this a habit. What's it called? Jocko would say discipline equals freedom. If you're disciplined enough to make clean code, then you're free to do anything within your code.
And you'll write great code, and people will like you.
It's all about being liked. I think in the long time, I mean, you know what? It's kind of like that. Do something for 17 days, it becomes a habit or whatever it is, right?
It's actually
The more
67.
you do, it's 67 days.
Yeah, they got the science wrong, but yeah.
That's why I don't have any habits, I guess. 17 minutes. But I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, you do something long enough, it becomes second nature. You start writing cleaner code. You put a little more forethought into it instead of just putting something together. You've kind of naturally gotten to that point to where things make a lot of sense.
Boom. Couldn't have said it better.
So elegant.
Thanks.
Well, pretty much done. I kind of ended it with that quote, but I'll add that little bit with you. But yeah, we killed it, guys.